Am I on?
So yes, we're going to hand over to Dad, to Andy. Welcome those of you who are joining us online for our special event, Grŵp Elen, noswaithau eich I gyd. We're going to hand over straight away to the Archdeacon of Anglesey, to Andy Herrick, to lead us through this evening, where we're thinking about how we impact and connect with our communities. So Archdeacon Andy, Dad, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, it's lovely to be with you. I hear a lot about this group, and it's all good. And so it's a real delight to be with you. I did a little thing on this, virtually the same thing, but a much smaller thing in the last meeting. I don't know how many of you were in that, but I think one or two of you were. But this is what Naomi has asked, is if I can just expand it a little bit, and that we can sort of work together on one or two things too. I was just thinking when Naomi asked someone to pray at the beginning and no one offered, in stark contrast, some years ago I was on a bus in Zambia, and Zambia is a place where you don't have a timetable. You go when the bus is full, when there are no seats left. So we'd sat for about 3/4 of an hour waiting. The bus was absolutely ram-packed full. We just drove out of the Lusaka, the capital city. We pulled in at the side of the road, and the bus driver, because it's such a strong Christian country, said, "I'd like someone to pray for it." Well, first of all, we had a gospel address, an invitation to give your life to Christ and all that sort of stuff on the bus, as you do. And then he said, is there a passenger who'd like to pray for us? And about 12 all started at once. So he yelled at everybody to be quiet. We ended up with 2 men literally physically fighting over the right to pray for us before we went on the journey. So they had to be pulled apart physically. Just very different from us, isn't it? Where we just avoid eye contact and stuff. But there we are. This is what we're going to do, is spend a little bit of time. I'll talk to you for a little while and explain one or two things, and then we'll do a bit of group work and see how we go. But it's very much this thing of engaging with our communities. And it's really, for me, it's the story of a church that I was involved with. I was in Aberystwyth. Well, we'll come to it in a moment, but I was in Aberystwyth for nearly 10 years in St Michael's and St Myers. Now, St Michael's is the huge eclectic church. We used to have sometimes between 300 and 400 on a Sunday, and lots of young people and students and so on. And then the Welsh church, St Myers, which is only just down the road, which wasn't anywhere near as big, but a vibrant, strong little church, a monoglot Welsh church. But in my heart, I was longing for the opportunity to go up the hill to Penparky, which is all the council estates on the edge of Aberystwyth, because when I was a curate, I'd spent some time there and just fell in love with the place. And the opportunity came to go back. But before I just tell you a little bit about that story, I love these words. Ordination services, I think most cathedrals have different wording for the actual service. I don't think there's a set wording like there are for some things. And I came across this one for the ordination of deacons. And of course, a deacon is just a servant or a minister. And really, that's all of it. It isn't just those who are ordained deacon. In fact, someone told me once that nobody's ordained deacon. You're made a deacon and you're ordained priest. Now, I don't know the difference between all those. But when someone stands before the bishop, these words are said over them. It says, deacons are called to work with the bishop and the priests with whom they serve as heralds of Christ's kingdom. They are to proclaim the gospel in word and deed, as agents of God's purposes of love. And then I love this bit. They are to serve the community in which they are set, bringing to the church the needs and hopes of all the people. They are to work with their fellow members in searching out the poor and weak, the sick and lonely, and those who are oppressed and powerless, reaching into the forgotten corners of the world that the love of God may be made visible. And when I first heard those words, I was absolutely stunned, because I remember thinking at the time, that's not just for those who are standing at the front being made deacon today. That's our calling as a church. That's our calling to be a servant church. But I wonder how many churches could read those words through and say, that describes what we do. Reaching into the forgotten corners of the world, searching out the poor and weak. They aren't things that come naturally to us. And I've always been wanting to ask those who have been made deacon in a cathedral service, in your first week as a deacon, did you do any of that? Were you actually sent out into the forgotten corners of your parishes and your communities to seek out the poor and the needy? Or was it just into church life? And I've always found that really, really challenging. Anyway, go back to 2009. That's when I did escape from Aberystwyth town and the big churches there, and went up to St Anne's, the community of Penparky. I knew both the church and the community were quite distinctive. St Anne's had quite a sad history, really, I thought, because its history was to feed the big churches in town. So as people, might go to Sunday school in St Anne's, and they might begin to go to church, but then they'd be told, if you want to go to a proper church, you need to go to Holy Trinity down in town, because that's where they do proper Anglican things. And a lot of them did. And then the vicar and the organist from St Michael's Church would go up to St Anne's a couple of times a year, and all the children in Sunday school, regardless of whether they wanted to or not, were given a voice trial. And if they sang well enough, they were put in St Michael's choir. So mum and dad, of course, had to troop off down to St Michael's. And that was their history. They just fed the bigger churches, and nothing ever really grew and developed in St Anne's. It was usually the curates from town who were sent up to Penparky to look after St Anne's. The vicars hardly ever went up there. And it was really seen as the poor little relative of the parish of Aberystwyth. And as a community, it lived in the shadow of Aberystwyth too. Although it's up the hill from Aberystwyth, it was looked down on by the people of Aberystwyth. It really had quite a bad reputation. It was mostly working people living there, high number of young families, a high number of elderly people, and a whole raft of social problems. But this is a strange statistic. It's the highest settled population in the whole of Ceredigion. Aberystwyth town's a bit bigger, but there's all the students and those who come and go so quickly. As a settled population, it's the biggest place in Cardiganshire. The school there, just as one little marker, had over 50% of the children were on free school meals, which is an incredibly high percentage. I don't know what it is for, what a good percentage would be, but that's really high. And at the time, they were putting schools into sort of groups of similar schools. So you weren't automatically linked to the school down the road. You'd be linked to another similar school. And believe it or not, Penparky School was linked with Rhondda Cynon Taf because of the social problems and all of the poverty that was there. And so it really did have issues. It was an amazing school. For exam results and all those sort of things, it didn't do very well at all. But there was one statistic on the way that schools are measured, and it was this: on the last report that children were given before they left that school, every single child, without exception, had made progress and advanced in the right direction. They might not have got very far, they might have not reached the high levels of some of the other schools, but they'd all made progress, every single one, without exception. And we were really, really proud of that. When I went there, only a few years before, there'd been a Roman Catholic church, a Methodist church, a Presbyterian church, and ourselves in St Anne's. Two of those had closed, one closed while we were there, and there were no other resident ministers in the whole community. This is the largest settled population in Cardiganshire. Anyway, I started, it was a midweek service, and the following morning, I went and stood in the church doorway. And I was just pondering and thinking and looking, and it suddenly dawned on me that from the church doorway, I could see Llanbadarn Fawr Church, which is actually in the next parish, but that was a strong church too, very much a bit higher. We didn't have any real Anglo-Catholic churches, but that you'd call that a little bit higher in terms of churchmanship than the town churches, but that was there just down in the bottom. I could look down to town and see St Michael's, this huge eclectic church with hundreds in the congregation. I could see St Myers Church, the Welsh church, with its really distinctive role to serve the Welsh population. And I could see Trinity Church, which again was quite a vibrant church, still in the sort of evangelical tradition, but a much more traditional sort of church. And so I could see four churches that way. If I turned round and gone out the back door of the church, I would have seen over towards Llanachan, which was our little country church as well. And the thought suddenly crossed my mind, we've got no reason to be here. Because we only had about 20 in our congregation, and literally we could have just closed St Anne's and dispersed our 20 people to the churches which they would prefer, which some would go to St Michael, some would go to Llanbadarn. There were plenty of choice there. The Welsh speakers could have gone to St Myers. It would have just made sense to have closed it and dissipated elsewhere, saved an awful lot of money, saved a stipend. It would have been an easy thing to do. So I thought, if we're going to be here, we've got to have a really distinctive reason. We've got to have a purpose other than just being a little group of people that come together on a Sunday for some worship. And so we we sort of really began to think hard. I had a great little group of people, although they weren't very big in number, they were a fantastic group of people. And we talked together in a committee meeting about how churches measure success or failure. And we realized that the first one was always the size of the congregation. How many people go to church on a Sunday? Clergy are obsessed with it. I even found myself this morning trying to get the information about how many people were at the various synod meetings this week, just to know if Anglesey was the best one. We're obsessed with numbers who turn up for things. And often when you get clergy together, you know, you'll say, oh, we had a good service on Sunday. Oh, did you? How many were there? And it's the how many were there that is the marker. And so often that's how churches measure, you know, how many people go there. The second thing that we worked out was that churches are pretty much obsessed with the state of their buildings. A sign of a failing church would be one that can't afford to do its basic maintenance, can't afford to respond to the Ezra report, the quinquennial report, and is just watching it slowly fall apart. A successful church would have a renovation project and a reordering project, and would be all singing, dancing, underfloor heating, and you know the sort of thing. And some big churches go for that in the millions of pounds rather than the the small amounts that would just be needed. I had a friend of mine, Dave Mail, who does a lot of stuff with evangelism among sports people, and he was in a marathon and he heard two people in front of him sort of chatting as they ran, and what he heard was that they were talking about converting the lost, and he thought, that's me. So he sort of caught up with them and said, I'm into that too, you know, that's my big thing, tell me more about it. And they were looking at him very strange, because what they were actually talking about with their heavy breathing while they were running, they were talking about converting the loft in their house rather than converting the lost. But Dave said that, you know, for some, that's what churches do. They convert the loft and lose sight of converting the lost. We get so caught up in our buildings rather than in what we're called to do. So the state of our buildings, and then money, of course, is a massive issue. It's an issue for all churches. And again, lots of churches are measured whether or not they've got money in the bank. So we sat down together as a committee and we came out with this statement. It took us a couple of meetings to come to it, and I still think they were a brave little group of people who said it. And they said, St. Anne's Church, we will not be measured by the size of our congregation or the amount of money that we've got in the bank or the state of our building. We will only be measured by the impact that we have on the community around us. And we made that our one marker. And we realized very quickly that you can't measure that anyway. But that was the thing we were looking for, that we would serve the community. I got in touch with Bishop Wynne, our bishop at the time, and said, we want to change our name. And he said, churches don't do that. You are St. Anne's Church and you will stay that. And I said, can we not become St. Anne's Community Church? And he pondered it and he thought, actually, when you hear community church, it tends not to be an Anglican church. So he wasn't very keen on that. But what we had on the wall outside in huge letters was St. Anne's Church serving the community. And that we made that our statement. And I used to tell them week after week, that's for us to read, not for everyone else. That's to remind us why we're there and what we're for. So what did we do? I suppose the first thing we did was to decide that our agenda was not going to be driven by anything other than the needs of the community around us. Not by the needs or desires of those who came, especially those who came from outside Penparky. We did have a small number, or even those who'd been part of the church for many years. We would only be driven by the needs of the community around us. And one of my wardens put it like this. He said, what we're doing is sacrificing the church for the sake of the community. And I thought that was a really powerful thing to say. We were laying down what was precious to us as a church in order to serve the community. And we even said, if the church dies while we're doing it, well, so be it. That's okay. And we then very quickly realized that relationships were everything. We'd got some good people there who'd been in Penparky the whole of their lives, and they had neighbors and friends. They belonged to all the clubs. They were absolutely key people. But as people moved in, we really encouraged them to build good relationships. We gave the building back to the community. We insisted that it was for the community. It wasn't just for those who came. So we had our centenary. So we put glass doors in to mark the centenary, so people could just see in. So instead of having to come to huge wooden doors, they had a latch that used to stick. And so as you turn the handle, it wouldn't go. And then when you turned it hard enough, it would be like a pistol going off. And of course, everybody inside would turn and look who was coming through the door. And for some people, that was just the big putting off thing. So we had glass doors put in so people could come and look in and see before they actually turned the door handle. And you know, a lady stopped me in town one day. I'd never met her before, and she stopped me in the street and said, "Are you the vicar of that church up in Penparky?" And I said, yeah, expecting to get a row. You know, vicars are like that. When someone comes up to you in the street, you know you're going to get it in the neck for something or other. She said, "Are you the vicar of that church up in?" I said, "Yeah, I am." She said, "Do you know, I never go there, but I drive past it every morning on my way to work. And every day I see the church door is open, and it reminds me there's a God and I need to pray." And you know, just having the door open. We are on the big main road, and so, you know, thousands of cars went past every day. But just having that open, and a Catholic guy used to drive up from Pembroke, which is miles and miles away. He was a salesman, and he had a client in Machynlleth, and he used to leave Pembroke half an hour early because he knew our church door would be open, and he could stop off on his journey and come in. Just the open door made a big difference. We did have the luxury of a brand new hall with kitchens and toilets. That made doing things much more easy, but we wanted to make it available for the community. And of course, that's a source of income. But the same little committee decided that we would not take any bookings on a Saturday, so that we could let children have their birthday parties for nothing. They didn't have to hire it for a birthday party. So they could the kids of Penparky could all come and have their birthday parties in our hall with no charge. And we just wanted to give it back to the community. And I won't go through all of this that I've got down here, but one of the things that we realized we had to do was do things that were much more out there rather than in here, you know, so rather than everything being focused in the church. We set up a food bank. The food bank people were sent to us because none of the churches in town thought there was a need for a food bank. So they came to us, and we thought we were just going to do it for Penparky. We did it for the whole of Cardiganshire. And actually, we took parcels for a few weeks, believe it or not, to Dolgellau, because of someone who was connected with Aberaeron down south from Aberystwyth. But we set up the food bank just in our church porch. That was where it all happened from. We realised there was a gap. There was nowhere in the community for people to meet. And just to casually sit down and have a chat and a cup of coffee. So we tried for years to set up a cafe. We came incredibly close by going into partnership with the Methodists, who just stopped using their building. But that didn't work out. And in the end, another group who we worked very closely with, they got some new premises and they could do it. But the hall is still used once a week, where meals are served and coffee and everything is served, and you just pay whatever you can afford or whatever you think you ought to pay. One of the great things, which used to exhaust us, but was just really thrilling, we did a thing called Starkey's Lunch Club. The Archies is the nickname for people from Penparky. So when they're all out in town on a Saturday night, it's the Archies who've come to cause trouble again. And St Anne's, we put that at the beginning, so we had Starkey's, and we ran a lunch club. It was originally for kids on free school meals, but we thought that just increases the stigma. So we literally took a step of faith and opened it up to anybody who wanted to come for a free lunch from the community. And we used to have some mums who could well afford to feed their children. There was no problem with that at all. But they were just so exhausted by the end of a morning with 2 or 3 kids on a wet day. So they would come and they'd all sit at a table, and it was all taken to them. And then if it was a foul day, we'd put a film on in the afternoon for the kids to watch, and mums would sit and drink tea together at the back. And for some, I think it was almost a lifesaver, you know, just that opportunity to go there. I could tell you lots more about Starkey. We set out with no money. We had no idea how many people would come. In the first year, we served over 1,000 people, 1,000 meals, and we broke even financially on the last day. It was just quite remarkable. And we realised as well that families love to go to the cinema, but Penparky families couldn't afford it. But if you've got mum, dad, and 3 kids, and you go off you pay to get in, and you buy your popcorn and your drinks and everything, it is hugely expensive for a night out. And they couldn't afford it. So we got the copyright licenses, we had a big screen and a good PA system, and we put on film nights free of charge for all the families in Penparky. And we even bought a popcorn maker so they could have limitless amounts of popcorn for nothing. We used to give them cheap pop, which meant they probably didn't sleep for a week afterwards, but it was still just as much as they wanted to do it. We did afternoon tea for the elderly. We did We had really good, strong links with the school, in and out all the time, and just really good links there. But we made a real point of working with other agencies too. So there was a great thing called Team Around the Family, which supported families that were struggling. Plant Dewi, which was actually a diocesan thing, but really working with some of the struggling families there. We were very close with social services, the youth offending team, Penparky Forum, which arose out of the community's first government things, that were to help really struggling communities. But one of the main things in the teaching and the preaching that I made a real point of was say we can organize all these things and we can do all these things, but the most powerful thing of all is for you as individuals just to be good neighbors and good witnesses. Look out for the people around you and be willing just to chat to them about the good news and the hope that's in us. And that again just led to lots of things. And to finish this part, which I've already gone on too long, I think the ultimate, I suppose it was a compliment, and we shouldn't have taken it in that way really, but it was on the 23rd of December that a family appeared at my little office in between the hall and the church, and they were literally desperate. All the agencies were closing down for Christmas, so they'd been to try all of them. They'd been to Communities First, they'd been to the Housing Association, they'd been to social services, they'd been to Team Around the Family, they'd even asked the staff in school, and nobody could help them because they were all just closing down and they didn't have the people or the resources to do it. And when I chatted to them, they had nothing, literally nothing for Christmas. They had no presents for the kids, they had no food, they didn't even have electricity because they couldn't afford to put money in the meter. So the house was in darkness and it was freezing cold. And nobody had managed to give them any help at all. But when they went to social services, which was the last place they went to ask for some help, they said, I'm afraid we can't help you at all, but go to St. Anne's and they'll sort you out. And I thought, no pressure then. So they arrived with us late on the 23rd of December, but a couple of phone calls and a few messages, and we literally kitted them out for the whole Christmas. People gave, one family came with their Christmas tree with all its things, and they said they can have our Christmas tree. But I just thought that was an amazing compliment. Go to St. Anne's and they'll sort you out. And it was costly, it was tough work. We didn't get it all right. We made lots and lots of mistakes, but it was just really trying to engage with the community, where they're out there with them, rather than it all sort of try to drag it all in towards us. So that's just a little bit of the story, and I could go on and on and on about it, because it was just to me it was an exhausting but an enjoyable time and a very fulfilling time. So but every community is different. That's just one community that had a very, very special place in my heart. Even before I went there, it had a special place. And when you are somewhere that you've got a real heart for, you want to make a difference and you want to do things. So what I want you to do now, just as individuals, and just wait. If you've got a pen and paper, you might want to write it down, or you can just think. That'll be absolutely fine. I just want you to take 2 minutes, literally 2 minutes, and think about the community where you live, or the community that you're closest to, and just scribble down on a piece of paper what happens that makes it a community, or makes it the community that it is. What groups are there? What societies are there? What buildings are there that make it special? What are the things, the events, the people, the groups, the facilities that make it the community that you think is special? Okay, I'm sure you haven't got a complete list, because you'd need much longer to do that. But what the next little thing to do, again, just on your own, is to look at all those different things and just ask the question: in that community, is there a gap? Is there a bit of a, is there something missing that would that either leaves an age group out, or a particular section of the community, or is there something that ought to happen there but just doesn't happen there? See if you can identify a gap. You might still be sitting there thinking, well, where is there a gap? What age group doesn't get much, or a particular section of the community? Okay, what we're going to do, we're going to go into groups of, can we do 4s? Would that work? 4s, if we go into groups of 4, I think that'll probably be 3 groups. Go into groups of 4 and just take, we've got quite a bit of time. Maybe just each of you share a little bit about your community and where you see the gap. And then after you've done that, only take about a minute to do that, because otherwise time will run away with us. Just a quick share of what makes your community special, but there's a gap here. And then between the 4 of you, decide which one of those you're going to just take 5 minutes to think, how could the local church fill that gap? And how could it act to either bridge things or fill the gap, or however you want to see it? Okay, so if we go into groups, just each of you to share in your 4 a minute about your community and what makes it unique and special, and where there's a gap, because even in the best of communities there are always gaps. And then if you choose one of those 4, you might need to argue a little bit about which one you're going to do, and then what could the local church do to fill that gap? What would be a good thing? Okay, so we're dreaming dreams a bit, and it's always good to dream dreams, but see how you go. So who's going to put them in? Richard's going to put you all in. It'll be random, so we're not going to. There's been no engineering as to who you're going to be with. You'll just find yourself with 3 others. Okay.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, good time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Shall we just literally take a few seconds from each, if a quick little report back? I think there were 3 groups, weren't they?
There were. So Debbie's group.
Who wants to report back?
It's called Debbie's group. I think that means it's you, Debbie.
Oh, okay.
Well, do.
We had a good chat. We found that we got things in common in terms of quite middle class areas, and where weren't reaching out to people, and not weren't reaching out to people, not saying that at all, that there was quite middle class areas on the coast with nice sort of not much open and transparent deprivation. But we found a gap in Judy's area for where the estate was set separately in Menai Bridge, and that she didn't feel that they would come up the big hill to the church. And so our gap was to actually go into their estate and maybe work in the park there. We've been doing work in Lanny for the last sort of 3 years, where we go into the park, we play games with the kids, we have a barbecue, we've even provided beers for the local residents before now. I'm not sure how PC that is, but we've done it. And we've gathered that community, and it's taken a long time, but they do trust that we like them, and they do trust we're not looking down on them, which I think initially they thought these are Christian do-gooders looking down on us, trying to make themselves feel good. Whereas now I think they realise we're just normal like them, and we like them. And we were saying that maybe there was a gap in Judy's area where we could do something like that.
Yeah, really good. Yeah. Another group?
Keith's group 2.
Don't want to reply? Anyone want to feedback?
Go on, Keith.
All right, I'll do it. We had a mixture of groups. Our churches were, it was a mixture of rural and urban, which is quite interesting. We talked about the different things that we did in our churches and what we've been involved in. But I think the group that sort of emerged, we thought was emerging, were teenagers, young people, which is often the case. But actually, it's interesting, as we're all talking, what also seemed to emerge were holiday makers, visitors coming into our communities. Yeah. From where we are in Pemachno, we've got the bikers trail, we've got canoers, we have the slate trail, we have walkers coming into the area. The pub across the road from church has a big bunkhouse. We've got ancient stones in the church itself. A lot of people come into our community, and in the same way would go into Llandudno, into Corris, and onto the Anglesey communities that Hugh was talking about, as well as caravanners. And it's so people come in, and what do we do to make them feel welcome? And then we got switched off. Couldn't get any further.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm really excited by Hugh's thinking and plans for the caravan people, because on any given Sunday in the summer, probably half of Anglesey, the people on Anglesey don't actually live here, and doing something for them I think is a real opportunity, and that's the whole diocese, really, isn't it? The whole of Bangor diocese is in that situation. Yeah, just a third group. The third group
thinking how to get out into the community by being in the community, right in the middle of it, and then Llanidloes, again looking at the estate that is a bit tougher for people there, and actually going onto the estate and doing things there, and during lockdown having taken things for Easter and Christmas to be able to talk to people on the doorstep. And then in Tywyn, there are quite a lot of gaps.
You've just frozen, Ruth.
On the beach and things like that. A lot of young single mums, a lot of issues with mental health, and also thinking actually about those who've been bereaved, where they haven't been able to be with those they loved during lockdown whilst they were dying, where they haven't had those proper goodbyes, and actually how do we allow them to talk about that?
Yeah, really, really good. And I think I can only describe one community where I did the things that we did together as a church there, and as we've said, every community is different, but there are those gaps there, and it's being in there and among them, and I think is just so important, being out there. When you look at the New Testament, nearly everything happens outdoors, or if it doesn't happen outdoors, they knock a big hole in the roof to get the friend introduced. So much happens out on the road and in the streets, and yeah, really exciting. Anyway, we got just a few minutes. What I want you to do, we're going to put you back in groups. You may be end up. I don't know whether you'll be in the same groups or different groups, but we've been talking about where are the gaps. But another thing that I think is really, really important is to do stuff that's already happening. And with that attitude, the verse I always think of is when Jesus said, the Son of Man didn't come to be served, but to serve. And just to think, so what's going on in our community already that we as a church could say, we would love to come and help you by doing this, or we would love to get alongside you. What can you give us to do? I was just to give you a little example, as I think we had the school in Penparky used to have a big fair every summer, and as a church we volunteered to steward the car park and to pick up litter. So the church people would just spend the day going around with bin bags picking up litter that had got dropped, and we made sure cars didn't crash into each other in the car park, and that was our role. And we didn't draw attention to it, we just said, can we do that for you? And so if you think what's in your little groups, what's happening in our communities that we could actually just not take over, not use as a platform to preach from, but can we just go and serve and be there with a sort of real humility? We just want to come and help you and serve you. So back into your groups, say for 5 minutes, then we'll just have 2 minutes back together again, and that'll bring us up to about 8:30. Okay. There we are. Okay. We were chatting away and didn't realise the time, so you've had a little bit longer than we were anticipating, but probably still not enough time. Again, just very, very quick. Just any little feedback from each group. I don't know if the same ones want to go again. Do you want to start at this time, Ruth?
Just Bronwyn had a light bulb moment about being involved with the caravanners, because they've got lots of them, and that's somewhere where the church could go out to them. And be there, and then just what groups to be involved in our communities. There's lots of church members involved in different groups, but there are ones that are desperate for people where we could step in and help in that way to enable them to keep going and provide stuff for the community.
Yeah. And I think, like I only just mentioned it very briefly, but one of the key things in was that we made sure regularly we in the teaching and the preaching, it's your being a good neighbour and you're being a good witness that is as important, if not more important, than all the organised activities, because that's the salt of the earth. And
We just finished in our group with Keith reminding us about that. You know, it's actually it's the people that matter, and it's the you know, it's the going out rather than we've got to get out rather than be in the church. You know, but
yeah. I mean, you could have a church which organises absolutely nothing through the week, but is a fantastic servant-hearted church, because the people, in a sense, they're too busy to do things in church because they're out there in the community living out their Christian lives in that way. Yeah. Debbie, how was your group?
Well, it's great. We were talking about the fact that actually, because of COVID-19, it's like we've got a clean slate, because all the normal things that we're all involved in and help with as part of our Christian ministry have a lot of things have stopped, and actually we've got the chance now to take a breather, and as things re-establish themselves, to offer our help. Alison had talked about going out to the caravan parks, and we were all just saying that actually it's like a new beginning. It's a chance to look at it again. I'm thinking of Fiona, actually, our street pastor. I don't know where she's hiding. I can't see her, but I'm thinking of Fiona, because I'm thinking, I know that girl has such a heart for getting out to people, and I can just picture us all taking that sort of mantle now and just going out and getting re-involved with the groups and seeing how things are. But I love the fact that you helped with the school faith, and we were saying that, like, lots of us are helping. We organise the school faith. We are doing those things as part of our ministry, but it's a brilliant idea to do those things that nobody wants to do, picking litter and car park, and yet it's such a brilliant way to help. So good.
We had in Aberystwyth, because we had the luxury there, because we had the car park and we could charge, and it was so busy, we could employ staff. We had this mad as a hatter Irish youth worker called Steve, who's just an amazing guy, and he always had dog poo bags in his pocket. He didn't have a dog, but he always had, and if he was walking down the street in Aberystwyth and he saw any dog poo, he would just, if you were walking with him, he wouldn't even break the conversation. He would just quietly go over, pick up the dog poo and put it in the next bin he found. And he just saw that as something he could do. Made no issue of it. Just got on and did it, you know. But I mean, Naomi and Richard know him. He was well, he still is, mad as a hatter. But there we are. Keith, little report back from your group, Keith.
I mean, we talked a lot about our individual situations, really, and trying to identify what we might be able to do. But I think, you know, we did also talk about the fact it was about going out from our church, and you know the you know, as you said yourself, Andy, at the beginning, it's Jesus said, I'm here not to be served but to serve, and that's important. And I just said, I made the point that, and what we've got to do now is pray about it and seek God's guidance as to where we are to go and how we are to help.
Brilliant. I'm really excited by all the way you've engaged that. Just literally just to round things off. It's one of my favourite passages of scripture where Jesus sends out the 12, and what always amazes me is Jesus is sending them out to do this incredible ministry and to do what he'd been doing. And I love the first instructions he gives them: take nothing for the journey. And I love that, because so often we think, right, what resources have we got? What can we afford? Do we have a budget? Where can we get the income from? All those things come in. And actually, he just sent them out and said, take nothing. What's interesting is, except a staff, which seems an odd thing. Surely a bit of money would have been better, or a change of clothes or some food. But the only thing they were allowed to take was the staff. And I used to think, well, it's really strange, isn't it? But if you go to the Old Testament, you will find most of the key characters at some point or other have a staff in their hand. When David goes out to meet Goliath, he's got a sling and a stone. He's also got a staff in his hand, which he wasn't going to fight with. And you've got, you know, Moses has a staff, and there's something about the staff of God, you know, the good shepherd, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And it's just a sign, I think, of our relying on God rather than resources and all the rest of it. And I think as these disciples went, the liberty they had, because they didn't have to carry anything with them, just this staff as a reminder of God walking with them. It was a brilliant thing. And I think what really excites me about that is it costs nothing. What Jesus, you don't need money, you don't need anything. You just go and live out the gospel. And we can do it individually. They did it in pairs. We can do it as churches, just to do that. And the fine little thing, I mentioned that the decision we took as a church committee, and we really did some heart searching, because we knew it could be the end of the church. If all went pear-shaped, it really could be the end of the church, that we would not be measured by the size of the congregation, the money in the bank, or the state of the building. Actually, what we saw was that that we paid all our bills. We made a thing of saying, give us this day our daily bread, means pay the bills for today. Let's not worry about what to come down the road. If you provide us with enough to come to the end of the financial year, having broken even, you've provided for us. You've given us all that we need, and we're grateful for it. The congregation grew, and mostly through that engagement with the community. And we had lots of people who would say, yeah, that's my church. They never came on a Sunday, but they'd come to parent and toddler, they'd come to the film nights, and they identified that as their church, because that's where they felt they belonged. Now, some would have a real issue about the fact, if they don't come on Sunday, are they really members of the church? Well, we counted them in, and we said, you can belong to this church even if you don't come on a Sunday. But the congregation on a Sunday did grow, and it was lovely to see. So we paid our bills, and the congregation grew, and actually we did have just enough money to do what you'd have done in your living room if it was looking a bit shabby. We put a new carpet down because it was threadbare, and we put some new lights in because they really were awful, and a little bit more heating. The best one was, and I promise I won't go on, I had a treasurer who was just probably the best church treasurer that you could ever want. And we took on top of all this, we took on responsibility for an orphanage in Zambia, where a friend of mine had just been suddenly given it to run after horrendous history. It was some Germans who'd gone and set it up, and really it was a front for abuse. It was just absolutely awful. So my friend Raphael was asked to take it on, and he phoned me and he said, we have no food and we have no money. And so we set to, and we managed to. Anyway, it came to the January, and I suddenly thought, all these kids are going to have to go to school. There were 65 kids, and I think 40 of them needed to go to school. And in Zambia, you pay fees. And so I phoned Dave up, and I said, Dave, these kids need to go to school. Have we got any money spare? He said, there's nothing in the current account. There's nothing in the deposit account that's spare. Give me a few minutes. I'll see what I can do. He phoned me back about 20 minutes later, and he said, we've got that little building fund because the architect says we need to replaster the inside of church, and we've been saving up to do it. He said, I gave him the figure for what it would need to send all these kids to school. He said, I reckon if we buy it, because all the plaster was cracked, it wasn't falling off, but it was all cracked, and you could see all the cracks in it. So Dave said, if we buy some tins of thick paint and we put a coat of white paint on, we can send all the rest to Zambia, and maybe the architect won't notice. And that's what we did. So we painted it with this thick exterior emulsion that covered all the cracks up, sent the money off to Zambia for the kids to go to school. And it just, I mean, to have a treasurer who was willing to do that was just absolutely superb. But yeah, we paid the bills, the church just looked neat and tidy, and the congregation grew. But that to me was a real sign of God's goodness and mercy over the little efforts we did to serve the community. So thank you so much. It's been lovely. It's just lovely to see screens of people who are into this sort of thing and really wanting to do this. So huge thanks for giving me the privilege of being with you. Thanks to Naomi for asking me to come. And if any of you want to ask any questions or talk over things, please get in touch. It's you'll find my contact details through diocese or whatever. But do get in touch, and if you've got any questions or so on. But we're well past past now. Sorry, Naomi.
Thank you.
That's fine. Thank you, Archdeacon. We're going to stop the recording in a minute, but just to say a big thank you for all that you shared tonight. We'll make sure we mute the bit about cheating the architects.
Yeah, I think so.
We did tell him.
Really had a very lax archdeacon in that diocese.
We're looking forward to moving down. We'll see. It's going to be great. But no, thank you very much, Archdeacon. Thank you, Dad. It's been really valuable. And for anybody who's joined us via YouTube or Facebook, if you want to get in touch with the Archdeacon, with Dad, please do so and ask some more questions.